Good evening, everyone. Mr. Shri Mishra, chief guest of this evening, Shri Ravi Shankar, Professor Rajshekaran Pillai, Shri Vipin Tyagi, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to express my deep sense of gratitude to Shri Deepak Sahu for inviting me to this function and asking me to share some perspectives on the USOF. I'd just like to mention that the USOF stands for the Universal Service Obligation Fund. First, I would like to explain what the universal service is and the obligation part of it is. Telegraphy or basic telegraphy, which is now a little over 100 years old. The idea of universal access came about with this concept that when telegraphy as a medium of communication came into vogue, in the United States, AT&T at that point of time was entrusted with the task of expanding the services. They used a word called universal access to try and say that communities who live in the rural areas also need to have access to the telegraphy services which are available in the urban areas of the United States. I'm mentioning this because the United States has been a front runner in the technological sphere. When we come to the whole aspect of universal service obligation in the current era, we inevitably understand universalization of elementary education, universalization of health services, and universalization of very many activities. In that genre, the Universal Service Obligation Fund was set up almost about a decade back, April 2002. And the idea was that India has lagged behind in this whole concept of rural teledensity. So we need to take rural teledensity to the masses. And telecom service providers who were given licenses, as they were contributing a levy to the government in the form of fees, a part of that was apportioned for the Universal Service Obligation Fund. It was felt that this particular fund, which is available with the government, should be utilized for the benefit of the rural areas and how rural teledensity and the other like of activities began. At the outset, it began with what is called as the village public telephone services. Subsequently, it graduated further on to what is called the shared mobile infrastructure. And now we have entered the era of what is known as the broadband. So optical fiber communication is an important aspect. I would like to dwell upon an important project called the National Optical Fiber Network, which is what the Universal Service Obligation Fund is likely to fund for the entire country, with a view to see that the telecom sector gets a major fillip or a boost. Today, teledensity in the country is of the order of about 75%. Rural teledensity is 38% and urban is about 165%. However, broadband penetration is lagging far behind. And even if we take comparative statistics across the globe, we don't measure up too well. With this perspective, the government felt that if we are going to go about in the same manner, it would take several decades for us to actually see penetration of the broadband to the rural areas. So the best way it was felt was there should be a public investment. There is the notional balance with the USO fund. So why not utilize that fund for the benefit of the rural teledensity improvement and also the broadband penetration? So the idea came about that we have about 250,000 gram panchayats. Let us wire up all the gram panchayats, because right now optical fiber is available predominantly up to the district level, to a great extent to some of the blocks, but beneath that to the Gram Panchayat, it's very minuscule. And if our villages have to be brought into the paradigm of what is called the inclusive growth, it's imperative that we take broadband to the Gram Panchayats and then maybe to the villages. So 250,000 villages, the government felt that let this be wired up so that on this telecom infrastructure can ride all categories of IT services. E-governance, e-learning, e-medicine or telemedicine, e-commerce. All of them can prosper on the strength of a sound and basic infrastructure on the telecom side. So the National Optical Fiber Network entails building incremental optical fiber from the block downwards to the Gram Panchayat. That way we are trying to take it, I would not say last mile, but pre-last mile, because the last mile would be further down to the villages and to the homes or the habitations. So the pre-last mile, nevertheless, a very important milestone to cover the villages through the optical fiber. It also entails that when we are taking optical fiber, the bandwidth should be high, because today, while broadband is defined as now from 256 to 512, the availability should be enhanced to such a level that it's not just text, but video streaming can also be viewed, because that's when telemedicine and e-learning and the like can prosper. So the emphasis is that let's take 100 Mbps to the Gram Panchayat. We would like to ensure that 250,000 Gram Panchayats get 100 Mbps so that e-learning, e-commerce, telemedicine and e-governance, all of them can ride over it. So that is the perspective. How do you go about it? Well, the government felt that up to this point of time, the USOF has been embarking on giving what is called the viability gap funding to all the telecom service providers for either your shared mobile infrastructure or any other category of activities funded by the USOF. But in a departure from that particular perspective, the government felt that let us own this fiber and let us have this fiber under our control. So they have decided that they would set up a corporation called the Bharat Broadband Network Limited, which will be entrusted with this task of setting up the 250,000 panchayats, almost 5 lakh kilometers of optical fiber. And the Bharat Broadband will in effect will act as an asset management company, while the asset would be owned by the government, the Department of Telecommunication. This is what technologists would call as the aggregation layer, while the core is block upwards. Block to the Gram Panchayats is the aggregation layer. And beneath the aggregation layer is the access layer. And that's where non-discriminatory access to all categories of telecom service providers or ISPs or DSPs, whether they are cable operators or content providers, all of them would be given bandwidth. That being the operational model, what the industry can look forward to is, once the National Optical Fiber Network is rolled out, this will afford services to be delivered to the Gram Panchayats. The National E-Governance Plan of the Department of Information Technology entails setting up about 1 lakh kiosks, which is now being upgraded to about 250,000 kiosks, and the idea was to take e-services. So one can ensure that the higher bandwidth would be available and the e-services could be very well calibrated and modulated. So that will ensure that there is a local area participation. State governments inevitably come into the fore, as all of the services of e-governance are predominantly state government services, whether they are land records or PDS or social security in the form of pensions, etc. Now, we would like to see that also education, which is now being run through the mechanism of the National Knowledge Network linking up a number of higher educational institutions and research institutions. That benefit also flows down to the schools. The National Optical Fiber Network would ensure that if you have a high fidelity broadband to the villages, then you could have e-learning transforming the educational scenario. In the same way in telemedicine. So the entire game will change for not just the villages, but also for the service providers. We have to look at it as to how to blend aspirations with offerings. There is a whole ecosystem that can be developed, because if we look at the triad of policies with the Ministry of Communication and IT through the National Policy on IT, National Policy on Electronics, and National Telecommunication Policy, all of them the draft policies which have been put out, all of them try to bring about a convergent way of working. One, if the National Optical Fiber Network is rolled out, you would have a huge demand for electronic products, whether it is the tablets, the Akash tablets and their genre, similarly your smartphones. So you would have a huge market out there, because broadband wireless or Wi-Fi or fiber to the home wherever it is feasible, all of this would come about. That is going to open up a plethora of opportunities both for the telecom service providers and the IT companies. For the IT companies, it's a huge network opportunities because the backhaul is going to be robust. So it has to be a huge network that is in place. Also, the IT offerings, because the content has to be driven to the consumers. And this is where language technologies and content creation get into play. The entire opportunity that is there out of this National Optical Fiber Network should be seen as something in which the Indian young demography can translate itself to the next higher level of skills. We have the National Skills Development Initiative, wherein 500 million Indians ought to be skilled by 2022. There is scope for what I call a mass IT literacy campaign. Mass IT literacy, not just in the English language, but it has to be inevitably in all the constitutionally recognized 22 languages. If that does occur, a young, vibrant population would become savvy, net savvy. And once they are net savvy, I think they become empowered. So we look at the empowerment process. Technology should be leveraged as an empowerment process. And once they are empowered, I think what we are looking for as a national objective, the socio-economic development, inclusive growth. I think we have to look at it from that larger perspective, that technological development will lead to game-changing opportunities. And that's where the National Optical Fiber Network project as a whole is not just a telecom infrastructure project, is not just an IT leverage project, but a socio-economic development project. It's often said that the growth of broadband, a 10% growth, will lead to 1.38% increase in the GDP. I think that's what is a relevant factor. Let's use technology. Often enough, when we watch the games of IPL, one of the most popular commentators, Ravi Shankar, says the atmosphere is electric. So you would see that at every point of time when a final is there. So let's look at it today. The atmosphere is definitely electric. There is going to be electronics everywhere. So while the atmosphere is electric and there's going to be electronics everywhere, we who are seated here in this forum need to look at it how we can join hands in a united fashion to take all the offerings to the rural masses. They are waiting. A young India is waiting. And I think the Universal Service Obligation Fund has an obligation to provide universal service, and we are all part of it. Thank you very much.